Most entrepreneurs chase income, and the wealthy design an exit.
What they do is they have plans, but they do not have a strategy.
So they say strategy is 20%, execution is 80%. Because if you can't do it consistently, then your strategy doesn't exist. Let's first start with why people become entrepreneurs. As you've said before in our various conversations, entrepreneurship is not for everybody. And it is certainly, you need to be somewhat crazy to become an entrepreneur. And I see that for people become entrepreneurs for many reasons. Some want freedom, some want impact, some want to solve a problem. But for most of them, the big motivation is greater financial rewards, obviously. But here's what most entrepreneurs missed. The biggest financial payout is not from monthly profits. The biggest payout is when a business is sold, whether it's partly or fully. So this is why today's topic of scaling matters. Scaling turns a business from an income generator into a valuable financial asset. So when we talk about scaling, we're really talking about designing a business to maximize freedom, impact, as well as long-term wealth. So in short, most entrepreneurs chase income, and the wealthy design an exit. So when we talk about the difference between scaling and growth, to me, growth is doing more, but scaling is doing more without proportionally increasing costs, people, or complexity. So I think that's the number one key difference. A founder-driven business can grow, but a system-driven business can scale. And I like to frame it this way. You grow by percentages, but you scale in multiples. Growth adds, scaling multiplies. So scaling means moving from 1 to 2 to 5 to 10 over time. Most businesses typically grow by simply doing more and getting caught up in the chaos of increased activity. They operate. And what I find is that few make the conscious effort to pause and distill what is truly working and laser focus to dominate a niche. To me, that's what scaling is. And that actually requires design. So if you take, for example, someone like a company like Southwest, they clearly define their niche of low-cost travel. They systemize it by having only one type of aircraft, and they understood that the key thing that mattered was time in the air. And that was all they focused on. Very simple. But that was the system that they built that allowed them to keep adding routes and knowing exactly what to do. So when we talk about the big payout being when you sell a business, buyers and investors don't pay for hard work. They pay for recurring revenue and businesses that can run without the founder. And scaling is what makes a business truly desirable and saleable.
Thank you for that. I think what you've done is you've given many new perspectives about scaling and the vital difference between, let's say, growing and scaling. If I were to summarize what you said, growing is incremental, but scaling is geometric and exponential.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Second, growing is largely about income generation. It is not necessarily about the creation of an asset which can be sold, for a significant valuation in the future. So that's the second, I think, valuable insight about scaling. And the third one is growing almost always founder-centric. It starts and probably ends with the founder, but scaling, transcends the founder. But, with or without the founder, scaling works. And pretty much all great brands, businesses, whilst they've retained the spirit, the flame, and the vision of the founder, they've gone way beyond what the founder, envisioned the company to be. Ultimately, investors want a company, a business which is scalable rather than just a company which is growing. So I see these as some of the very key points that you touched on.
Yeah, I think often we see, founders, they always want more, but it's almost accidental. Let's go to the market. Let's see what happens. Whereas I think scaling is really about designing the company so that you can dominate. And I think being able to dominate is a good test of whether you are scaling or not.
So what you're really saying is, if we're trying to grow, it is seldom a product of design. Okay, it's really about chasing customers, new business, new clients. So it's really doing what it takes to get more customers rather than creating a DNA or blueprint which empowers the company to, let's say, multiply. That's really what you're saying, right? By design.
Yeah. So you see what happens is that a lot of founders are busy. They are putting in a lot of effort. But where is that effort channeled? Is it merely to do more of the same thing? Or do we take a step back and really design and say, with this effort, same effort, we can actually do multiples more rather than incrementally more? And I think that requires, a conscious effort rather than by accident is what I'm saying.
Okay. It's very interesting, if I were to, let's say, unpack this in, let's say, in a layman's language. I think 7-8 years ago, there's a good friend of mine, a dentist. He was running a relatively successful clinic. He was making about 600, 700,000 a year. He had 2 or 3 people, one at the cashier, one, I think, the main nurse. And then there was one person who was dishing out the medicines and the prescriptions and so on. And he caught up with me and he said, look here, Karthik, I want to scale my clinic. And he was a doctor, and I had no doubts that he was probably a good doctor, but not necessarily a great entrepreneur. So I asked him, do you want to grow your business or scale my business? And he said, what's the difference? Aren't they exactly the same? I told him, here is a difference, which may be relevant to you. If you want to grow your business, your 600,000 ringgit a year, and let's say your costs are about 200,000 or thereabouts, you let's say make maybe 400,000, or something like that. If let's say you manage your clinic better, you have a proper customer management program.
Right.
Every time a customer comes in, there's a particular process of receiving the customer. There's a particular process of, diagnosing the customer, then prescribing the medicines, and then following through with the customer, how the customer is doing, and then reminding the customer, hey, you know what, it's been 6 months and it's time to have your teeth checked and cleaned for sure. Let us know when you want to fix up an appointment, and then because you're situated in a particular mall, what if you offer the services to the tenants of the mall, right? Yeah. You can offer a good deal to them. So I said that would kind of tantamount to growing a business. I said by doing all these things, you might probably move from 600 to 800, even 900. It's a pretty good jump, better than what you're doing, without doing too much of hard work, which I know he was not willing to do. Okay, then he said, then what's the difference, between growing and scaling? So I told him, if you want to scale your clinic, you probably need to standardize your clinic first. Have a clear system of reception, prescription, diagnosis, payment, follow through, loyalty, and so on. So that's number one. Tell yourself, I want to have an 800 square feet clinic. This is how the layout needs to be. Have a very clear, let's say, messaging, branding. Let's call it speedy, let's say, dental clinic. And then say it's about getting in and getting out really fast, right? Yeah. Have a very clear proposition. And then approach an investor and open up 5 clinics in different vantage points in Kuala Lumpur. They've got to be mass traffic points, just like where you are currently situated, which is in Bangsa. And then create that 800 square feet, layout. 3 staff, 1 doctor, and replicate the same system structure and layout. And the brand. Call them all Speedy White Dental. So right now you're doing, let's say, 600. You multiply by 5, you've become 3 million in about a year or year and a half. So you've literally 5x'd your business.
Yeah.
Then he said, wow, that sounds interesting. What is the big problem with this? I said the big problem with this is going to be something which will strike your heart. You got to stop being a dentist and start being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That means you have to pull yourself out and work on it like a founder rather than somebody who's fixing the teeth, cleaning the teeth, right? Working 12 hours a day, and so on and so forth. It's very interesting.
What was his response?
He took a deep breath and he said, wow, never thought of it like that. You know what? I love what I do. I think I prefer growing. I wanted to be a dentist.
Yeah.
And I studied for it. And I've become a relatively good one, And I'm not interested in scaling and being this founder and having this whole bunch of clinics across Malaysia. I said, wow, that is, a very quick decision. I said, it doesn't mean you're a better human being or better doctor or, better person just because you've got 5 clinics, You got to ultimately align with what matters to you.
So as I was saying earlier, the motivation to be an entrepreneur is different for everybody. And for some, it's a lifestyle income, and so be it,
Let me also summarize 2 things you said, Boon. I just want the people watching it to understand the significance of this. I think the 2 very, very fundamental, let's say, insights you've shared. First, when you grow a business, you don't necessarily need to design your business.
Yeah.
So that it can be replicable.
Yes.
Right? I think that's one.
A lot of it is organic.
Correct. It's organic. Right. And the second one you said is to scale your business, you don't just need to design a business which is replicable. You also need to not make it
founder-centric. Yeah.
Exactly. Founder-centric.
Yeah.
And that's really what it takes to, let's say, make this quantum jump. Would that be an accurate summary of what you said?
Absolutely. I think, we often see founders who can't give up control, and that's really where the business is stuck.
Brilliant. I just want to pick up on the last thing you said and go on to the next question.
Right.
Once again, this is a question, that I'll say 98% of the entrepreneurs grapple with. Why do I say 98%? Because 98% of, let's say, Malaysian entrepreneurs struggle either as SMEs or micro SMEs. But some of them are micro SMEs and SMEs for 35 years. Now, what are some of the biggest challenges SMEs, small, medium enterprises, grapple with when it comes to scaling? What holds them back?
I think to answer your question of why only 2% or maybe even less really get to become great giants, and this is not just Malaysia, it's all across the world. The statistic is keeps coming up. And that is really that as companies grow, the increase in complexity is exponential. So just two of us talking, we only have two vectors of communication. But once you add a third person, it goes to 6. And then, it's exponential from there. With 4 people, it's 16. So it's the complexity that ends up being the bottleneck for really growing in a sustainable manner. So typically what we see is that as companies grow without a system, it ends up very chaotic. I'm sure you've seen, you've been in corporate, and it's a case of nobody knows the clarity of who's supposed to be doing what, and you assume I'm supposed to do it, I'm assuming you're supposed to do it, and then in the end, nothing gets done. So that's what I call the growth chaos. And typically, for companies to grow, they all go through a certain stage and then a chasm, and then the next stage, with each stage having their own problems. So coming back to your question as to why a lot of SMEs stay stuck, I would say that the fundamental root is really that increasing complexity. And how do you overcome that? You first start with a founder's mindset. Do they want to do it? So whilst, there are systems, such as we'll talk about in terms of like what Vern Harnish has done in putting a scaling up into a system, I think conceptually the knowledge is easy to understand, but I think implementation is definitely not so straightforward.
So basically you dwelt a lot on the fact that making a quantum jump to, let's say, drive scaling necessarily means that an entrepreneur will have to embrace complexity beyond what he or she is used to. I think that's one. And, along with that comes a lot of chaos because once you get bigger, it means more people, it means more, let's say, wheels within wheels, a lot of moving parts.
Well, there are obviously a lot of cross currents because we are human beings, we're not machines.
Yes.
So embracing chaos or change, but ultimately there are ways and methodologies to create alignment, which becomes a critical component.
And you spoke about the founder's mindset.
Yeah.
Could you, delve a little bit on that?
I touched earlier where we talk about a lot of founders not willing to give up control. So, they are the best salesperson, they are the best connector, they know the operation the best. And very often what we see is that founders may be reluctant because they're so busy to sit down and maybe map out the training, for example, is something that they would put as a last priority. But without that, how do you train the next person who come along? So it all ends up being in the founder's hands, and this is where that bottleneck and the mindset shift needs to come from. And what in my work of helping companies to implement scaling up, we really talk about the fact that leaders need to be able to predict and delegate both the founder and the next level. And that is so critical in especially today's fast-changing world of chaos.
Let me just pick up on this founder's mindset.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And they tell me we've got a problem with our product, we've got problems with our staff, we've got problems with competition, we've got problems with, regulation, with supply chain disruptions, and so on and so forth. So what I do is I listen to all this patiently, and then after a few months, once I've built a bit of trust with them, where we, become more like friends, and where the masks come off, and where you can have a real conversation. At that point, I gather the license to tell them that there's only one problem your company has, and it is you. Because you are the one that is holding your business from, let's say, realizing its potential. And just to build on what you said, most founders, not all, most, they're extremely possessive of what they have built or created. They fall in love with either their product or service, and that's one huge factor which holds them back. So it's almost like their baby, right?
Well, for many, it almost defines their identity, right?
Absolutely. It is the company, they are their business, right?
Yes.
I love the word identity. Now, because of that, they find it next to impossible to what I call transfer the knowledge they have, which is inside their heads.
Yep.
One of my investors, extremely successful guy, he shared a very powerful insight. I never forgot about it. Of course, I found it a little difficult to implement because I wasn't experienced enough. He said the quintessence of scaling pretty much lies in the capacity of the founder to transfer all his or her knowledge to his people. And then I asked him to explain more. He said when this founder started the business, he first secured business entirely by himself. He got in touch with the first customer, and the customer, gave him the business. So he said that's really how he started out. Then he said at a second level, if you want to grow, that is in a sustainable way, you must stop soliciting for business. Your team must solicit and acquire and build business. He said when your team starts to do that, you begin to grow. Then he said, here is the truth about scaling. You got to go more than the team. When your customers start selling your products on your behalf, you begin the journey of scaling. So he said level 1 is a founder-driven selling marketing. Level 2 is, you can call it function-driven, let's say, approach. And level 3 is when your customer itself is your brand ambassador and begins to sell. And that's really when the word of mouth kicks in, it goes viral, a lot of other people get to know that. He said until you're able to get to a place where the customer is beginning to sell for you, it's going to be very difficult for a business to scale.
Well, I would use that when you have customer advocacy, that's your definition when your strategy is on track or it's correct. Basically, when you don't have to go out to market yourself and the phones are ringing anyway, that means your strategy must be right. And that would, to me, that would be your acid test. Whether with that increased business, you can actually execute equally well as when you were smaller, I think that requires design. So that customer advocacy may or may not help you, I think, if you don't know how to execute well.
So in other words, what you're saying is even if the customer, let's say, advocates for you, and your business, let's say, doubles, quadruples, and so on, you still need a business design to make your business sustainable. Otherwise, operationally, you will fall apart.
Absolutely.
Because you're, foundationally, not strong enough. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, because the chaos comes in. Say, hey, if I double the number of transactions, I need more people to handle. With these extra new people, are they doing the same thing to the same standards? Do they understand what the customer needs are that the older staff are very familiar about? So there will clearly be gaps. And when you have gaps, then the customer experience will obviously deteriorate. And then you lose your advocacy, which is where the chaos comes in.
Very interesting. I think we kind of explored a little bit about chaos and complexity. Then we went on to the founder's mindset, which is the ultimate, let's say, trap or challenge. What are the other, let's say, challenges faced by small, medium enterprises that hold them back from scaling? What are the other common challenges?
If we use the scaling up framework that Vern's developed, he talks about the right people, your strategy, your execution, and cash. And for me personally, I added leadership as the fifth pillar. And typically the pitfalls always fall into these 5 categories. So when you talk about people, when we talked about increased activity, you need to hire more people. I've done this mistake myself as an entrepreneur. You hire people maybe in desperation, and you always hope they are the magic pill that will solve all your headaches, and it doesn't always pan out. So hiring wrong is very often what you see. My personal experience tells me that how to hire more effectively is really a pattern recognition exercise. It's really going back to when you have someone interviewing, you actually use repeated questions to look for patterns to see whether they are truly, because you can put so much BS when you're sitting in an interview. So I think that would be a common mistake of people, not having the right people in the right seat. When we talk about strategy,
you've touched on something important.
Yeah.
I just want to dwell a little bit on this.
Sure.
See, this is a big one.
Yeah.
People. I just want to, kind of flesh this out a little more. What really stops entrepreneurs from hiring good people? Everybody knows this, and everybody, hears this, and everybody is, I'm talking when I say everybody, I mean entrepreneurs are explicitly told hire good people, right? Why is it seldom happens?
I think they don't have a hiring process. So hiring right, if we look at most growing businesses, you're so pushed for time, you're firefighting, I need more people, every department shouting, I need more people. And what does HR do? They typically, the standard process, they put an ad, the interview, and the interview maybe is I don't know how long or with how many people. But I think the really successful companies who hire right spend a lot of time at the recruitment stage to make sure you get in the right kind of people that you're looking for. It's not just about skill sets, but it's probably more about attitude, your core values, than competency. They say you hire not for skills, but really about the attitude and the person. And I think especially in today's age of AI, intelligence has become a commodity. You don't need that. It is really how the mindset of the person who can really take on an issue, own it, and solve the problem.
This is a very important area. Hiring people, recruiting the right team. We've looked at a process for hiring, which is really the first thing you've spoken about. The second thing is don't just hire skill sets. Keep a sharp attitude. Because as the saying goes, you can train skills, but it's very difficult to train a person's attitude.
And the mindset.
And the mindset for sure. So that's the other very big thing that you spoke about. And you brought in another interesting insight. It is pattern recognition. Can you just touch a little bit on that?
So the guy who is really good and wrote the book about this is called Jeff Smart. He wrote a book called Top Grading, and he basically developed that into a system. When we say attitude, what do we mean? Or how do we test attitude or even mindset? So he's saying that the pattern recognition, for example, you ask the same question, and the system is from your first job to all your jobs, you ask that same question as how would you define your success in this role? And you start to look for patterns, whether it's all bullshit or made up, or there is no depth to it, or they clearly knew the detail as to why they were successful. So that becomes that pattern recognition. So, achieving success in that particular role is just one of the attributes, but he has a whole series of questions you could ask to develop that pattern recognition.
So basically what you're saying is don't hire superficially.
Because, you can ask about one job and you can lie about it, right?
Correct.
But if you look at repeated patterns, now if I ask you just about 3 jobs, you may fake it somehow. But if you have a long series of roles, it becomes a lot harder to cover up your weaknesses.
So really look for
consistency,
underlying, let's say, drivers. And what are the 1 or 2 things about this person that probably makes this person who he is, which is not apparent when you see either a resume or when you, let's say, speak to a person. That's really what you say.
I think what you want to see is a constant ability to either solve a problem or, an approach towards excelling.
Okay. Talking about people, maybe I'll come from a slightly different angle. One piece of advice I got, and I was, let's say, mostly successful when I executed on this advice. And that advice was this: if you're an entrepreneur, don't just hire good people, go out of your way to hire impact players. In fact, this is not original. There's this lady called Liz Wiseman. She made this very interesting distinction. She said there are 2 kinds of good talent. One is a contributor,
Right.
a serious contributor. They do what they're supposed to do. They work hard. They are competent. They are smart. They are dedicated. And they are very keen on delivering what they signed up for. Now, that's a contributor. She makes this distinction between the contributors and high impact players. A high impact player is determined by a very different set of skills. This person, one is shows initiative. It's not just about doing what they've been asked to do or tasked to do or to deliver. What they do is they take the initiative and they go beyond the scope of their job description. What does that really mean? They do what needs to be done.
And beyond.
Exactly. and beyond, and beyond.
So I love math, so I have a bit of a mathematical model on this. So we talk about three components of what we define as a great player. And it is, I'm sure you've had in your experience, someone who is great, the impact player, can do 3 times the job of a good player. So even if you call it A, B, and C. To be a great player, you need integrity, vision, and competence. These 3 ingredients. Now, any of the 2, what you described as the one who does his job, has the competency and the integrity, but no vision. So he can't see beyond, and the ones who have basically just competency and vision, but without the integrity, they are your guys who's going to steal your system and leave, obviously. So in these various other combinations, you always have a gap. So your great player always needs this 3. I've seen another model, they call it the tourist who comes in the office and sort of looks around and says, I'm present.
Yeah.
And then you have the prisoners of work who are, what you say, they deliver, they do their job, they whatever, the job scope. But they are the prisoners of work. And then you have the commandos who say, what needs to be done here? And not being told, they will go fix it. So
I think that's an interesting framework, having integrity, vision, and competence.
yeah.
Let me just take maybe less than a minute on who an impact player is, because I'm coming from a slightly more subjective, let's say, perspective here. An impact player does not just go beyond the job description. The impact player has the ability to deal with chaos. That is what a contributor finds very difficult to handle. The moment there's chaos, which is a new situation, you got to call your boss, right?
Yeah.
And they're not good with navigating complexity. So what they end up doing is they, pass it over to up the hierarchy. But an impact player has the capacity to navigate chaos, does what is needed. Like if a faucet is leaking, a contributor will say, okay, the admin guy is hopefully going to fix it. But the impact player will say, okay, it's leaking. We'll call up the plumber, right? Or we'll tell the administrative manager, and will simultaneously, play a part to get it fixed. Because it's a job to be done. Yes, it's not his job, but it's still a job that impacts work, so they get it done. There's another interesting quality about impact players. They have this unusual capacity. Some of the tasks which their bosses are supposed to do. But their goal is not to threaten the boss or to, show off. It is just that it's a job to be done, right? And if that's not done, it has an impact on the business. So they just quietly get it done, and later on may or may not talk to the boss about it. They just quietly get it done. And they have the capacity to do something else. They can also do something which their subordinate is supposed to do, right? They just quietly get that done as well. So they can go, they can perform, beyond their rung and also below their rung. They can act as a leader during chaos, an emergency, or a crisis. And then they're more than happy to be a cheerleader and allow someone else to take the credit. And they are an impact player largely because they're not invested in the credit. They're not invested in showing off or playing politics. They're primarily invested in dramatically amplifying performance, level number 1, and more important, doing the job that needs to be done in a particular situation. So the advice I got was, an high impact player is 800% more productive than a solid contributor. And linked to this advice was this: if you have 3 impact players, high impact players in your team, they can run circles over a business that has 50 people or even 100 people, because they're able to zone in on really what matters and dramatically amplify, results.
Yeah, I think you're almost talking about an impact player behaving like an entrepreneur himself, right? And I think this is where I see a lot of businesses are not really harnessing the maximum potential from their staff, simply because it's always a boss takes the most money. There's nothing in it for me. If I do more, it's the same. If I do less, it's also the same. So personally, I'm an advocate for open book management, and where really there is a profit sharing system where then everyone's intelligence, self-initiative is harnessed through the system and it becomes self-governing.
We've kind of spent a lot of time on the need to hire the right people. And I suppose one of the consequences of getting your people right pretty much comes down to this. Often, it's not a business that scales. It is about getting people who can scale. In other words, when you hire big people, a small business becomes big. And when you hire small people, your business stays small. Pretty much as simple as that.
So if we use that framework of competency, integrity, and vision. So if you only hire what I call the B players, people who have the integrity and competent, you're never going to be able to transcend. And we do see it a lot that when companies, fast-growing companies, that very often the companies outgrow the people that they originally have. And that is one of the growing pains of fast growth, and how you handle that. So that question of asking, do we have the right people in the right seat periodically, or it should be an annual review, is critical, because companies do outgrow their people, and we need to know what to do with them and how to still harness that legacy of knowledge that they have with the company, but not make them feel obsolete.
I think we've covered a lot of ground on people. Mm-hmm. The need to have, not just good people, ideally high impact people. And then you gave a framework for that. And then you said it also entails a process. And then sometimes your organization can outgrow people, so you need a review of that, and so on and so forth. Let's move on. What's the next big challenge most small, medium enterprises, and particularly entrepreneurs, face when it comes to scaling? Besides people, besides, let's say, design, dealing with chaos?
If I default back to Vern's framework, so we talked about people, the next would be strategy. I would define strategy as the ability to answer this question, which is, in what way are you different from your competition that customers want and willing to pay more for? When you can answer that question succinctly, I think you're on the right track. And we also talked about when customers become your advocate, that's your definition that your strategy is on correct. And what I find a lot of the time is that, especially in the Malaysian context, where our markets are not that big, very often a lot of SMEs are hungry. So my analogy is that because when you're hungry and there is a buffet spread of junk food to health food, you eat everything on the table. And you end up doing a lot of activity that may or may not truly be beneficial to the company. Or at least they may feed you for a while, but whether they poison you later, I think if you speak to every entrepreneur, they would have a client that they dread. But why? And why continue to have them? But I think it also takes a lot of courage and deliberate analysis. It's that pause I was talking about. You're so busy firefighting every day. When do you take the time to really analyze and say, let's design our business so that we know which customers really matter and how can we do even more for them so that they can become our advocates?
So that's the essence of strategy, right?
Yeah. So defining who your core customers are, what you're offering, and what do you promise your customers, and what you promise your customers, is that solving the problem that they want solved, That test of what is your whole business strategies, what is the problem you set out to solve? And is it a problem that a customer wants to be solved?
So very clear, this is yet another big stumbling block, which is to get your strategy right. Just a perspective from my end, having worked with literally thousands of entrepreneurs, I find something interesting with the SMEs. So by SMEs, I include, companies that are, let's say 50 million and below. Most of these businesses and entrepreneurs, they don't know the difference between a plan and a strategy. So one of the things I, invest a lot of time doing is to explain this radical and fundamental distinction. What they do is they have plans, but they do not have a strategy. And the fundamental distinction is this: a plan is a set of activities to achieve some target. You got a manufacturing plan, or a customer development plan. It could be a hiring plan, and so on and so forth. All these are plans. The challenge with plans is this: they are a bunch of activities with targets, not necessarily coordinated, and not necessarily leading to a larger and meaningful either purpose or goal. And they are largely quantitative or volumetric in, let's say, the tasks they're gunning for, they're shooting for. But on the other hand, a strategy is a system, I'm using your word, and a method to win in the marketplace, to dominate the marketplace, or at least a clearly defined segment, and to have a very clear positioning in the market. Yeah. So I always joke by saying, if you look at the furniture industry in Malaysia, there are about 2,000 furniture companies, most of them manufacturing, in and around the Johor area, mostly in Muar. Mm-hmm. And you'll find almost all of them doing pretty much the same thing. Furniture is fragmented. You've got wooden furniture, you've got, plastic furniture, you've got this highly ceremonial furniture, you've got indoor, you've got outdoor, you've got office furniture, and so on. And they're just manufacturing, they are, doing some quality control, gunning for some new customers, determining price, and so on, year after year after year. And 98% of them are losing money or flatlining. Now, I asked them, why is it nobody is really standing out? And when I ask all of them, in fact, I used to advise the Malaysian Furniture Promotion Council about a decade ago. Nobody thought in terms of what is it going to take for me to win? There is China, there's Philippines, there's so many different markets. There's Thailand, then there's the European furniture. And then there is the mother of all brands, which is IKEA. In every market, I ask this question, can you name a furniture brand? There's only one furniture brand that almost everybody seems to be able to name, and that's IKEA. And then I make this point, the difference between all these furniture companies and IKEA comes down to one word: strategy. All furniture companies have a plan.
Yeah.
But IKEA has a strategy to win, or to use the word you came out with, to dominate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They don't sell furniture. They're selling a lifestyle. It's either a colonial lifestyle, a French lifestyle, an Italian lifestyle. It's a British, kitchen, a French living room, and so on and so forth. So what you're really doing is you're not buying individual pieces of furniture or just a sofa set. You're buying the whole lifestyle. And when people go into IKEA, it's almost like Disneyland. You start somewhere and you go through this whole journey, end up in a cafe after an hour and a half. And what you're really doing is buying a lifestyle experience at the end of the day, rather than just different items. So, could you explain a little bit about a strategy?
So I think IKEA is a very good example, and but the essence of IKEA's strategy is the flat pack, and that's really what separated them from the rest of the competition. Every piece of their furniture starts as a flat pack, and that gave them the edge of costing, mass production, and also I think it appealed to I think humans are naturally want to create, so that assembly process attracted some people. Some people don't like it. But I think they were very clear who their target customer is. What is the pain that they're solving is to provide a lifestyle experience while shopping for furniture, as well as being affordable and having to go to multiple places to furnish a home. I think the pain that they solved was setting up home. It was one-stop setup home made easy, right? That was the strategy. And the promise that they gave every customer is that, yes, you come to IKEA, one stop, you can furnish your home. So it was very clear. And what they did, we talk about scale, is that every IKEA store is the same globally. And it is about being able to deliver that same experience and the promise that when you come to IKEA, you can furnish any home in one stop.
So really, once again, it goes back to what you touched on earlier. IKEA is a system.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And IKEA has a very clear, method to win in the marketplace, a very clear positioning, So we've touched on people, which was the first thing you spoke about. Then the second one was strategy. You gave your definition of strategy. I kind of added, let's say, this perspective of strategy versus plan. What's the third, let's say, leg when it comes to, let's say, scaling?
So the third leg would be execution. So what do we mean by execution? So you have a strategy, but without the discipline to execute it, it's just fluff. So they say strategy is 20%, execution is 80%. Because if you can't do it consistently, then your strategy doesn't exist. We come back to this customer advocacy. If you're going to have gaps in delivering that customer experience, then your strategy is not delivered every single time, right? Your promise cannot be delivered. So that is really about, execution is really about that consistency. So the biggest issue here is we're not machines, we're humans. Are we good at discipline? Who likes to go to the gym, without being told so typically this is where part of the chaos comes in, is about that whole consistency of execution. And that is really about discipline and the systems of meetings, whether you have a system to be able to execute consistently. If you haven't designed your SOPs or your systems, execution is always going to be random.
So by execution, you've kind of, framed it with a few pillars. You said the essence of execution probably lies in discipline, in consistency, in having robust SOPs systems. What else does it take to drive execution? Is it anything else?
There is a saying, why some companies are not able to scale is because some companies make it a point to develop a new habit. The other ones continue to make excuses. And that's really, to me, the essence of execution. It is really about taking that time to design your SOPs, to detail down your process. And I talked a lot about, I'm a big fan of process because I think, we need to build companies as machines so that it is self-sustaining. My motivation as an entrepreneur is so that it's a machine that continues whether I'm there or not. When I built the jewelry business, I said, my business bottleneck is about the quality of our salespeople. So how do we then become a people factory? We're going to manufacture salespeople that can deliver that consistent experience. It's like Singapore Airlines. It's a bit contrived, but every time it's good morning, whether there's a sincerity or not, at least that minimum standard has been met. So that's a system.
So in other words, the essence of a system is to deliver and drive predictable and consistent outcomes.
Absolutely.